Hello, hello. Welcome again to another Technology Happy Hour with Virginia Clean Cities. It's a lovely little holiday edition where we have Russell Presnell of Virginia Clean Cities leading and emceeing this talk. We talk about renewable fuels of two different kinds with two special guests. And with that, I will pass it over to Russell. But before I do, I want to let you know that if you'd like to know more about Virginia Clean Cities, please go to our website at vacleancities.org or email one of us directly. You can find our emails directly below this video. And hope to talk to you soon. With that, I will now officially pass it over to Russell.
We've got John Plant with Chevron's Renewable Energy Group, and Glenn Rhodes, who is a local Rockingham County farmer. How many generations? Eighth generation Valley farmer. John has 35 years of experience in the specialty chemical industry with companies such as Stolt-Nielsen and Dow. The last 13 years he spent with Chevron Renewable Energy Group out of Ames, Iowa. John has served in multiple levels of responsibility with CREG, where he started his career as a biodiesel operator and worked his way to the position of plant manager. John's current role is Senior Manager of Strategic Initiatives, and his goal is to assist customers with implementing lower carbon solutions for their fleets and assisting them in understanding the full benefits of renewable fuels. John holds an associate degree in general studies from Texarkana College and a Bachelor of Applied Arts and Science from Texas A&M. Let's see here. John married his high school sweetheart. Well, you don't hear that too much these days. But congratulations, been married for 32 years, has two adult daughters, and in his free time participates in Special Olympics with his oldest daughter and playing golf. John lives and works on the east side of Houston, Texas, and Mont Belvieu.
You got it.
Okay. And Glenn Rhodes is in studio with us this afternoon. In the background, Studio B at VCC headquarters, which is my office. Glenn is an 8th generation farmer in Rockingham County, Virginia, in the heart of the Shenandoah Valley. He lives and works on his family farm, which is called
River Hill Farms.
River Hill Farms. They raise beef cattle, poultry, crops, and do also some custom harvesting for neighboring farmers. His interest is in alternative energy, and he has, which has resulted in several on-farm projects involving biomass combustion, biodiesel production, and growing hemp. On a side note, Glenn has the very first hemp license in the Commonwealth of Virginia in collaboration with James Madison University, which we're very proud of. Okay, with that being said, we welcome both of you gentlemen. So glad to have you here. And John, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Okay. Well, first, thanks for having me today. Appreciate the introduction. And yeah, you don't hear too many of us around that married their high school sweetheart. I was 17 and she was 15 when we met, and so we've been together since then. There are some days I claim I taught her how to drive and others not so much, depending on how she's driving that day. So let's see here. Are you seeing my presentation in presentation mode? I hope.
Yes, I can see it in presentation mode.
Perfect. So as Russell said, my name is John Plant. I am located in Houston, Texas. I am actually in the Chevron offices today downtown. I live off just to the east side of Houston in the small town of, as well pronunciated there, Russell, Mont Belvieu, Texas, which is on the east side, part of that I-10 or I-10 East corridor going towards Louisiana. So I've been in the chemical industry, as Russell mentioned, for 35 years and spent my time in specialty chemicals, and then moved into renewable fuels with biodiesel, renewable diesel. And then about 3 years ago, I was working for a company by the name of Renewable Energy Group out of Ames, Iowa, was where our home office was, and still is currently. And then about 3 years ago, Chevron decided to come in and purchase REG because of our presence in the biodiesel and renewable diesel arena. So we were the nation's largest producer of biodiesel at the time. And we had a renewable diesel plant in Geismar, Louisiana, and we'll get into that in just a few minutes. But Chevron came in, purchased us, and we became Chevron Renewable Energy Group. So I got a little presentation for you. I'll try not to slide you to death, but do have some information and we'll work our way through. But really just want to have that conversation and discussion and try to educate everybody. And may have some folks that are very familiar with biodiesel, renewable diesel in the call. And don't be afraid to jump in and ask questions if you need to as we're going along. Because I'm just going to give you some details and just try to give you some base level knowledge of biodiesel, renewable diesel, and how we could be using them and how they are one of the lowest cost fuels available today. And that's one of the biggest things with biodiesel, renewable diesel is they're available today as we talk about other opportunities for lower carbon fuels or propulsion systems. This is one that's available today, and you don't have to wait for years to start lowering your carbon if that is your desire. So first slide here that we'll see is going to be a safe harbor slide. A lot of detail in there, pretty much just stating that we will be talking today, and there may be some forward-looking statements in there, but do not utilize that information to make any investment decisions or legally binding decisions based off the talk that we're having today. So I told you a little bit about Chevron REG. We actually started as a farmer's co-op. So Glenn, right up your alley, we started as a soybean facility, crush facility, and then grew from there, found the need for biodiesel, and then started production of biodiesel. Our first one was in Ralston, Iowa. It was a 12 million gallon a year plant, and then expanded from there. So at Chevron REG, we're working towards a lower carbon future. We want to do it in a cost-effective way so that it's available, but also help people lower their carbon output in order to help their sustainability programs. We have a goal of producing 100,000 barrels a day by 2030. With the acquisition of REG by Chevron, that got us about a third of the way there. So as we look to expand, one of the things that is recently taking place is we have expanded our renewable diesel plant that is located in Geismar, Louisiana. That was 100 million gallon a year renewable diesel plant that uses cooking oil, soybean oil, canola oil, all the triglyceride type feedstocks that we'll talk about in a few minutes to make renewable diesel. And that facility is going from 100 million gallons a year to 350 million gallons a year. And so we're at the very final stages of that upgrade. It was about $1 billion capital investment to make that happen, to expand our renewable diesel production there in Geismar. We currently have 8 active biorefineries in the United States. We've got, we'll look at a map in a few minutes about where those are located, but the Midwest, we have a large presence there because, as you would imagine, we have access to soybean oil there, as well as pork products and beef tallow, swine tallow, poultry fat, all those types of feedstocks, waste feedstocks that we will talk about here in a few minutes. So you can see some of the data there. Currently, we sold in about 724 million gallons into the market in 23, with about 420 million gallons of nameplate production capacity, which will be increased to that over 700 with the expansion of the Geismar plant. Why that makes a difference? Well, as you can see by these numbers, in the 408 million gallons of biodiesel that we produced in 23, we were able to reduce carbon by 3.8 million metric tons. And so that's a significant impact. You can see the comparison to things that kind of put it in perspective for you. About 9.7 billion miles driven by the average vehicle. It was like taking those vehicles off the road. 4.2 billion pounds of carbon that coal would burn, remove. So you can kind of see that comparison just to put it in perspective of how much that really impacts our greenhouse gas emissions. Talked a minute ago about locations of our facilities. You can see them listed there. The dark blue are our facilities, production facilities. You can see one up top left-hand corner there in Grays Harbor, Washington. That's a 100 million gallon a year plant there. We've got one in Mason City, Iowa, Albert Lee, Minnesota, and then you kind of see those spread out there, Seneca and Danville, Illinois. And then, as we talked about earlier, our renewable diesel plant down in Geismar, Louisiana. If you look to the far right, you can also see that we have two production facilities in Germany, one in Emden and one in Uding. And so we have that presence there in Germany as well. What does the industry look like as far as growth coming? You can see the development there. The orange is the renewable diesel, blue is biodiesel. You can see the growth that we're expecting over the next few years with renewable diesel as we bring those extra gallons online and as other majors come online with their renewable diesel capacity as well. So this is an industry-wide look at those. You can see a small decrease in biodiesel, but you notice that it didn't go away. Because biodiesel, and we'll talk a little bit about this as well, is biodiesel stays important. And one of the main reasons is that right now, outside of the California and West Coast market, where the LCFS credits are currently, it doesn't make a lot of financial sense outside of those markets. So what does make a lot of sense is the biodiesel. And the other reason that we feel it's going to stay important is because the best fuel is actually a blend of renewable diesel and biodiesel both. When the industry went to an ultra low sulfur diesel, that sulfur actually provided lubrication for the fuel. And with biodiesel, it actually adds that lubrication back in. And so when you provide or use a blended fuel, say a 50-50 blend, or what we see out on the West Coast is an 80-20 blend, 80% renewable diesel, 20% biodiesel, that is a very good blend that gives you the lubricity and all the benefits. And what it also does is provide molecular diversity. So you actually see both fuels improve versus this effect where the lower one comes up and the upper one comes down. They actually both go down because of that molecular diversity. It helps with the cloud point, the freeze point, all those things, and it brings that lubricity back in there by adding biodiesel into the renewable diesel. So we call that an ultra clean blend. That's R80B20, so our renewable B biodiesel. So what are the benefits of renewable diesel? Well, you can kind of see here some of them in some more detail in there. With renewable diesel, it meets the same spec as the D975 ULSD spec. So it is a drop-in replacement for petroleum diesel that meets the same pipeline specifications of -10 degrees C. So if you have a vehicle's running diesel, that vehicle can have a drop-in replacement of renewable diesel, and you can lower your carbon emissions by up to 100% of scope 1 when you're talking about biogenic carbon versus fossil carbon. And that's a little bit more in depth than we'll probably go today, but you want to get in that discussion, definitely reach out to me and we can talk about that. But the simplistic part of it is a biogenic carbon is a carbon already existing in the atmosphere in the form of a beef cattle or a swine or a crop, a row crop that's there, that's carbon based. And we're taking that and refining it and recirculating in the atmosphere instead of a fossil carbon being pulled out from the earth and then emitted into the atmosphere. So that's kind of that high level difference there. It's a high quality. It's going to meet all the same specs as we talked about. Ultra high cetane, 65 is the number that we see average there. Good cloud point, and it's highly blendable, and then lower emissions on the engine as we talked about. Biodiesel, the benefits there. It's definitely a low carbon fuel. You'll get those same reductions. So a scope 1 emissions, 100%. Full life cycle emissions, is around 85 to 89% full reduction on a full life cycle basis. When you compare that to other technologies, say electric, outside of the California grid, you're going to see about a 45% reduction in carbon full life cycle. When people talk electric, they usually talk about zero emissions. That's true, it's zero tailpipe emissions. But when you start looking at full life cycle, the majority of the electric grid is still using fossil fuels to generate that electricity. Definitely not against electric. There's a right place for it. It works really well in certain applications. And we believe it's going to take an all-in approach. And you find the right application for the right type of fuel or technology, and you put that into place. You just want to make sure you're doing it in the right ways. Thinking about it from the most cost-effective standpoint. And when you talk about total cost of ownership, biodiesel raises to the top very easily at fractions of a cost and available today. So here is some examples of a B100 study and a B50 study that was done related to engine soot output. So this filter was placed on the tailpipe. And you can see there a B0, so no biodiesel was added. It was just an ultra low sulfur diesel. A B50, so 50% biodiesel and 50% ultra low sulfur diesel. And then a B100, 100% biodiesel. Very easily to see there the differences in the amount of soot that was collected on these filters. So they're all run on the same type of engine for the same amount of time. You can see the duration there across the top in minutes, how long it was left on there. And then you can see the amount of soot that was outputted. The big benefit that we saw in a study that was conducted was that the amount or number of regenerations on DPFs were cut about in half because you weren't seeing as much buildup in those DPFs. So we saw about half the number of regenerations, which equated to about almost a mile. I think it's just over a mile per gallon fuel economy because you weren't burning that extra fuel to burn out that DPF during the regenerations. So huge visual there that kind of gives you an impression of how much soot less is coming through biodiesel usage. One way to run that B100 is Optimus technology. We're in a partnership with Optimus. And what they do is they have a system called a vector system that allows any diesel vehicle to run on B100 year round. We're running snow plows year round in Wisconsin for several years now, trash trucks, refuse trucks up in Washington, D.C., running year round on B100. And so imagine the carbon reduction that you could see in your fleets by doing that. And we haven't had any cold weather operability issues because that's what the vector system does for you. It's a bolt-on system that allows you to run B100 year round through your vehicles. It starts and stops on petroleum diesel. And once it identifies the temperature is up in the biodiesel tank through a heating element that runs in that tank, it automatically switches over. The driver doesn't have any interaction with it other than starting and stopping the vehicle. So anyone that's interested in talking about that further, by all means, we can touch base and go in that and get Optimus involved and let them go through that system with you. Talk about lowest carbon options. Here's a comparison of B100 and the total life cycle carbon emissions compared to other technologies. Kind of talked that a little bit just before, but this kind of gives you that visual of how much less carbon you could be emitting. Who's utilizing this technology? Here's a short list of some of the folks that we're working with that are running, as we talked about, snow plows, school buses, refuse trucks, Class 8 tractors. We utilize biodiesel mainly in the harder to abate sectors. It doesn't make full sense like in just a car that's going to run around town or maybe a mail truck or something of that nature. This really makes sense in the harder to abate sectors where you're going to use large amounts of fuel. Here's just another visual of some of the customers we're working with. Here's some of the buses that we're running. We're working with Iowa State University there in Ames, Iowa. They've retrofitted 5 of their school buses that run around town to use B100. They're trying to reach some 50% reduction of university greenhouse gas emissions by 25. So they're well on their way by upfitting these buses, and we've placed 1,000-gallon biodiesel tank at their facility. And that's kind of how that works, is if you upfit your vehicles, you'll want to put a tank on site. We will assist and help with that to have a fueling service there. So you just keep fueling on your site. When they come back into the yard, you fill them up, take off, and you run the next day, and then you come back and do the same. City of Madison, Wisconsin, they've got 17 vehicles running in dump trucks, snow plows. They're at their site for the last several years with no issues. And that's the big one. We like to let people know there's not been any issues related to cold weather operability, which everybody's concerned about. City of Ames, 11 snow plows running in those conditions. Washington, D.C. have 76 refuse trucks operating for the last 12 years. 46 snow plows and 16 other assets. They've got 3 12,000-gallon tanks spread out through the city that they use for refueling services. And then, as we were talking about earlier, and some of you may have seen this or may have been at the ACT conference this past year, when the J.B. Hunt president, Shelley Simpson, was talking about, they did a study to determine if electric was the way to go. And when they started comparing total cost of ownership, they made some really clarifying discoveries and things that they figured, but they figured that in order for them to electrify their entire fleet, it would use the same electricity of about 1.4 million homes, or 1% of the US to power their fleet if they were to transition everything over to electric. And so that makes a lot of sense that there's other opportunities out there, and biodiesel and renewable diesel are definitely 2 of those. Some of the supportive states, as we see federal policies and state policies that are available to utilize, as those will really help the cost be more in comparison with regular ULSD prices. Outside of the states that have incentives, you're looking at a small premium on this fuel, usually a 5 to 10% premium. We're seeing some legislation change coming into 2025, going from a BTC or a blender's tax credit to a producer's tax credit. So we're expecting to see some changes up through there, but the legislation hasn't been finalized yet. So we're waiting to see the full impact of that and how that's going to affect everything. That is about the end of my presentation with a whole bunch of information I threw at you. So Russell, it's back to you. I don't know if you want to field some questions now, or if you want to wait to the end, and how are we doing on time?
All right. I think we're doing great on time. All right. And Glenn, I think you are up.
I advance these things. All right. It's good to be here. My name is Glenn Rhodes. I farm in the Shenandoah Valley with my family. My dad, who passed away 2 years ago, started farming in the 1940s. So he's seen a lot of things develop over the years relating to energy and farming. A little bit about myself: we grow turkeys for Cargill, and we grow crops and so on. And a little thing to add some credibility to myself: our farm is featured nationally on the honeysuckle white package. So that's been a fun little thing. Go into the store and see your farm on a package. Another little thing, since I don't have a long bio or an education, the John Deere Furrow magazine did a little article a few years ago. You can see there at the bottom, the Tinker Farmer. And that was a fun little episode. And one last thing, about 10 years ago, Discovery Channel did a series called Powering the Future. And I got about 3 minutes of time on the Discovery Channel show playing a farmer. So that was kind of a fun little thing. So farm energy or renewable energy on the farm is nothing new at all. My dad said that when he farmed back with horses, about a third of your output every year would go to feed your horses, which was energy. And of course you had on-farm energy of water. And here's just an example. This is a photo I took from my front porch of energy crops we've used personally on the farm: corn, barley, firewood, canola, soybeans. And this can be done several ways. You can do direct combustion. This here was a corn burner, a converted coal stoker burning corn. And then we moved on to burning wood chips when corn hit $8 a bushel. That was kind of a shock to the system. And then you can burn biofuels directly in your equipment if you produce it on farm or obtain it elsewhere. For us here on the farm, some of the fuel crops, canola was something new to our area, winter canola, but we have soybeans. And then a number of years ago, there was a big scramble for more fuel crops. Camelina was one of the crops that popped up and never really took off, but there was always the holy grail, what's the best crop with the least inputs? And then I stumbled onto a guy from Haiti that jatropha nuts was going to be the new renewable energy crop. So if you've been around this for a while, you know a lot of these things come and go. This was a real high oil content nut that grows in the tropics and apparently makes good fuel, but it's just not on the marketplace. Which brings me to canola. A number of years ago, about 10, 12 years ago, I met a friend through one of the burner companies, and he was importing oilseed presses. And he said, well, why don't you buy an oilseed press and make fuel? And I said, okay. So anyway, I bought a press, and we only grew soybeans at the time. And he suggested growing winter canola. So there's just a few slides of that crop, which is a lot of fun to grow. People stop by and take their high school pictures and their wedding pictures. And it's this is a view of our farm here looking off. Those are the Blue Ridge Mountains in the Shenandoah Valley. Skyline Drive, Shenandoah National Park is there in those mountains. Here's a canola crop when it's young. This has overwintered, or actually this would be in the fall, and covers the soil and overwinters. That's what the young crop looks like. And here's a standing crop of canola that's already bloomed. You can see the seed pods. There's just millions of little canola seeds on those pods. There's another example of the canola crop or the canola plant. And when it comes to growing crops, fertility is an important thing. I used to use this slide a little bit. You can see the big long plant laying there, and just 10 feet away from where I pulled this out, you can see a plant that was nutrient starved. So it does take some energy and nutrition to grow these crops. Here's the crop being harvested with a swather. This is the canola crop. It swathes the crop into a windrow, and then the windrow dries down. And I put these in there just to show that a lot of farmers already have equipment to grow these crops, even if they've not grown them in the past. And here's the windrow on the ground drying and harvested with a conventional combine with a pickup head, it's called. They're not very common in our area. That header picks the windrow up off the ground. They're more common in the north. There's an example of canola seed. The first presenter said he wasn't going to slide you to death, but that's my goal here. I just have photos and then talk about what we're looking at. So here's the camelina crop mentioned earlier. We just did a small 1/3 of an acre, a very unique little plant. And here's an example of how small the seeds are. If you have equipment that handles small grain, it needs to be pretty well airtight, or the seeds will run out of your equipment. And this is a soybean plant. Here's the soybeans maturing in the fall, drying down. And then brings me to another topic, industrial hemp. I've always been interested in unusual and fascinating things, and had the opportunity to partner with James Madison University early on to grow industrial hemp. My primary interest was in a fuel crop. I'd met a guy years ago that was promoting it as a alternative fuel crop. After growing it and harvesting some seed and crushing it, I don't think we're to the point that the hemp varieties are going to be a very viable fuel crop unless you would go into cellulose. But just as an oil seed crop, not terribly practical. Have kind of swerved over into the fiber side, but here's just an example of the biomass that can be produced with industrial hemp. And we have a long way to go with the breeding and hybridization of that crop. It's been neglected for a lot of years. Here's just another photo of the young, more hemp photos. This is harvesting the seeds in this case, which we did crush some of those for oil, and the yield wasn't that great at this time. But getting back to production of these oil crops or energy crops, just conventional machinery can grow most of them, and using on-farm nutrients if you have them. This is poultry litter, and just conventional equipment, tractors with tillage equipment. This here's a grain drill planting seeds. When it comes to growing crops like this, you get into pests that you've never seen before. This is a cabbage seed pod weevil that showed up the first year we grew canola. You have other pests. You can see here, this is a seed pod that has some of the seeds eaten out of it by the larva from that beetle. You get some other pressure from deer. It's not been a big issue, but there are things to consider when growing these crops of what pests you'll run into. Swerve kind of here into lobbying. It could also be in the pest category. Just kidding. This is our Congressman Bob Goodlatte, who was chairman of the Ag Committee in Washington for a lot of years. And so as you work on these projects of renewable energy and so on, you probably will need to do a little bit of lobbying. There's a lot of information out there, but a lot of people just know very little about the benefits of renewable fuels. And this Senator Kane visited our farm, and when my dad walked up to talk to him, it scared me to death because I didn't know what my dad was going to say, but turned out that no incidents were started. So that was a fun little visit. Here, I'm giving a little talk in Richmond, Virginia at the Ag Committee. Again, this was related to growing industrial hemp, but you really need to stay in touch with your legislators. And if you have an opinion or an agenda, they need to know about it. It often seems like you beat your head against a wall with these things, but eventually you do make some headway. This gets back to actual production of the oil. This is farm scale. Of course, the other production was like millions of gallons. I was happy to get a half a gallon when I started, so I'm at the very bottom end of the production scale. But as we started to produce some oil, we initially just blended vegetable oil with some diesel, but kind of chickened out and started to make biodiesel. But here's an oilseed press. And once you start producing like the press cake on the floor, you soon got to come up with a solution to deal with the volume. And if you just start tinkering, a lot of times it takes a little while to figure out a system that works good. This is press cake from soybeans. It's an excellent cow feed. We have cattle, so the oil coming out of this crop is almost a byproduct of making protein. It's not literally, but you can kind of convince yourself of that. So it seems more practical. This is a press cake pile of canola. Looks a little blurry there, but so you basically take an extruder or a press and a screw press, and it squeezes the oil tighter or the seed tighter and tighter, and the oil oozes out through the plates on the press. You also get a lot of other products of the seed coming out that needs to be dealt with and cleaned and recycled. So this was just kind of a learning process over time. Here's an example of the bottom where the oil drips in, of just the other seed particles and so on. Here's a picture of the press with the top off. And if you've been around this stuff, this is boring, but for me at the time, it was fascinating and very difficult to find information. Again, you make a gallon, and then you've got 5 gallons, and you got 15 gallons, and then you need to start forming a plan. So we ended up through trading with a fellow trading for a biodiesel processor that was sold to him. So basically on the far right of my screen, you have the press. In the center is kind of oil settling and processing. In the back, it's basically 3 identical processors. Not the best setup in the world with plastic tanks and so on, but it is what I had to deal with. On the far left is the filtration and soap removal. And then the propane tank there is a a way to remove the methanol from the biodiesel glycerin. Here's just a little picture of some of the processing equipment. When you make biodiesel, the glycerin settles out into the bottom, and then you have biodiesel on top. And in my case, using methanol, you have a lot of methanol remaining in the glycerin product. And so I came up with a way to distill that out to be reused. And then the glycerin becomes an animal feed, because you've removed the glycerin, which is toxic. Or, I'm sorry, you remove the alcohol, the methanol, and then you can feed the glycerin in your rations. Here's just a little quality control homebrew method here. And then you swerve into other things like how to clean it up. And as a chronic tinker, some of these things were kind of fun early on. This is a centrifuge, and I noticed some splashing and contacted the company, and they built me a new system. And so these things are always kind of fun to do if you like to tinker. Removing soap from biodiesel, traditionally on the homebrew side, was done with water washing. And I found out about a process of using wood chips to filter biodiesel. So I can filter probably 12 to 15,000 gallons of biodiesel through those two drums and remove the soap out. And then I do run through a centrifuge at the bottom there to just kind of polish the product up. Goes into that bottom tote, and we're ready to serve it up. Here's an example. If you're in the biodiesel business and you know how biodiesel gels, this is what I call my biodiesel weather observation jug. So I can look out the window in the morning and get a real good indication of how cold it is, whether the biodiesel is rather translucent or if it's frozen solid. So anyway, I've had a little fun with that on social media. Here's my glycerin distiller to recover the methyl alcohol. And these are all simple processes for industry, but as a farmer, it was some of these hurdles to overcome. And again, kind of a fun thing to do. Here's just proving that I can get some fairly pure methanol out of the glycerin. There's a topic often comes up with renewable fuels as food versus fuel. And I've always said we can do both. Here's a press that my nephew has. And you can take some of these crops and you can run them as fuel, or you could run them as food, or you can run them as fuel after they're used in food processing. So I don't think the food versus fuel has been as big an issue in the recent as it was in the past, when a lot of corn was turned into ethanol. But there's lots of things you can do with these oils other than make fuel, even use the fuel to cook your food. Another interesting little thing is how sometimes you can get wildlife benefits from these crops. The goldfinches just love canola seed, and they'll flock in by the hundreds if they can find a field. And of course, here's a picture of a blackbird that actually built a nest in the crop itself. So mono agriculture kind of gets a bad rap, but there can be a coexistence. Here's a deer looking out of the field. Honeybee. And this is an example of like a cover crop. This is a canola crop overwintering. It looks dead, but in the spring it'll perk up and start growing. So there are some benefits of growing some of these crops that overwinter as a cover crop. And then you can always swerve into things like soap production out of the byproducts. And these are all not necessarily practical, but a lot of them are fun. And then your daughters, they do very good at the science fair circuit with access to certain things. So that was a fun thing to help my kids. I have two daughters. They always did well at the science fair. And my daughter even got to do a presentation to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation on one of her projects regarding a biomass project. And of course, the cycle of use here in my case, in agriculture, we take the fuel, we can use the fuel to produce more crops to make more fuel. And here we're pumping water with biofuel, which is kind of the cycle of life here. I don't think that biodiesel will be the answer to long-term energy needs, but it is a huge part of the gap where we can take existing equipment buses, tractors, trains, whatever, and we can run them through their life cycle using biodiesel. And then maybe later come up with something different, whether it's hydrogen or whatever the new thing we haven't even discovered yet. But I think currently biodiesel is a good option, and it can be done small scale or it can be done large scale. So that's pretty much the end of my ramblings here. So if Russell wants to come here and take over.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Glenn. It was wonderful. And great to see those pics of the Shenandoah Valley. Boy, what a beautiful spot. And I've been lucky enough to be able to get out there on a couple occasions.
I wanted to say thank you so much for everyone for tuning in to this Technology Happy Hour. Especially thanks to Glenn Rhodes and John Plant for presenting. If you would like to know more, please feel free to contact Russell or myself, Gregory Brennan at Virginia Clean Cities. Our emails will be below. We've also put Glenn and John's contact information below if you'd like to have more and know more about their renewable fuels. We are going to continue on to a question and answer section of this webinar. Please feel free to continue to listen if you'd like to know more. And if not, thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Okay, well, just wanted to open it up for questions for our guests today. If anybody has a question, and I can, as you're thinking about those, you can just come on camera and ask for either one, or put your question in the message, and we can deliver it that way. To start this off, I've got a couple of questions for our presenters, and John, I'll start with you. First of all, thanks so much again for your presentation today. I saw you down in Lake Charles give a little bit longer presentation, and it just was mind-blowing. The scale of which Chevron Renewable Energy Group is producing fuel is astounding for people that are not in the industry or not an engineer. It's just wild to think about. But
I want to stop you there for just a second, and we got a shout out to folks just like Glenn that got us started in there. As I said, we started out as REG started out as a farmers co-op as well, and so that ingenuity that Glenn has shared with you, that's got a big fancy name called transesterification in the production of biodiesel. But it's gentlemen and families just like Glenn's that and the Rhodes that really amplified and helped us understand. So shout out to Glenn and huge round of applause and just congratulations on getting the level of understanding that you did and being inquisitive enough. And that's what drove the industry in the beginning and continues to drive it is finding those folks that are really interested in how do we make it better and all the things that Glenn was talking about. So kudos, Glenn, on that and keep going, sir. You're doing well.
Thank you.
And John, we'd love to hear more about where you see the industry going, what kind of growth prospects, into the future Chevron is anticipating. And as kind of a part of that, question-wise, wanted to see what your thoughts were on what the incoming administration how that's going to influence the biofuel market going forward, and kind of dovetail in with just the growth prospects and what you hope to see, what you think you'll see, what you're seeing, and all that.
Yeah, again, I think Glenn kind of coined it pretty well and hit a gap in my presentation that I failed to mention is just about the use of biodiesel and how that is a transition fuel. And we expect to see other fuels come on the line, but we think when we talk about it as a bridge fuel. It gets us to the next chapter. And, even in the marine industry, we're really seeing them starting to have a lot of in-depth discussions about what opportunities they have. We know sustainable aviation fluid, our fuel is coming. It's already being utilized and talked about, and they're going to be kind of isolated in what fuels will be available for them. And that SAF production is actually part of an additional process step of producing renewable diesel. And so we know that there's other fuels coming and other technologies that are being developed, as Glenn kind of showed us. It's about that ingenuity and understanding how things work and trying it and figuring it out and working the kinks out. But we know things like hydrogen and all the color spectrum, green and blue and gray methanols, and those types of fuels we know are coming. And electric, we expect to see battery technology come a long way to where the weight requirements that they currently have are getting improved, and the availability of those of the power of those batteries, the size gets smaller and the power gets bigger. They're just not there yet. But we have a whole division within Chevron called Chevron New Energies that are looking at all those things of how do we use those to the best benefit to get lower carbon fuels, to start focusing on those. But we know those are years down the road. And as Glenn referred to, we call it a bridge fuel. Is biodiesel and renewable diesel are fuels that are available today using the crops that farmers are producing and waste oils that we used to not have a use for. Used cooking oil from McDonald's, Taco Bell, those types of places used to go to landfills. And now those facilities are having to place locks on their vats because it's become a commodity and people are stealing their used oil when they had to pay somebody to come get it. So those are the type of positive impacts that can be felt in the industry as we better understand those fuels and how to utilize them. But yeah, we agree. We see other things, other technologies advancing, things that are more readily available, but there's just things that we've got to overcome in pricing of those fuels and availability, and how do we spread them across the United States and across the world to where they're available to everybody. Hydrogen, we think is a nice play into the future. We just got to figure out the best way to transport it, to get it to everybody, and how to get the price of production down. And that's what everybody's working on, including us. There's trying to figure those things out to make it to where it's affordable for everyone while we're producing a low carbon fuel. But in the meantime, we have these other fuels that are currently available that we know that are those bridge fuels that we see probably still being in play the next 15, 25 years. Because, like in the maritime space, especially when they build a ship, they're not thinking of replacing it in the next 5 to 10 years. Those ships will be on the water 40, 50 years, and that technology is being used today. Some of them are looking at how do we implement further technology, but if the fuel's not available, they can't really put it on the water till it is. We're even going back. Glenn had made a mention of, you saw the picture of the horses there and utilizing what we have. A lot of the marine folks are looking back at the wind and the availability of that. They're putting sails back on these cargo ships and coming up. They're finding new uses for the wind power turbine wings and using those on ships to help capture the wind power and save fuel costs there. So there's a lot of technology that has come, but I think we still have a long way to go, and we'll see a lot coming in the very near future as we continue to develop and refine and utilize those additional technologies that are out there. But in the meantime, we have things available today that we shouldn't just negate because we're looking so far in the future when we could be doing something today, because then you have to start talking about the cumulative effects of carbon, and anything we put in the atmosphere today, we don't get back. And so if we could stop putting or reduce putting some into the atmosphere today, that benefits us for the entire future. You asked about current political parties and the changing of the guard and president changing. When we talk about that, Chevron's been in business for 140 years. Regardless of the administration, we're going to work with whoever is in office, whatever party is in control. We're going to work with whoever it is to try to continue producing low carbon fuels into the future. It's about what makes the most sense for our customers, and trying to get that regardless of who's in office. Everyone wants to see improvements. And so it's just about working with who's ever there to try to make common sense decisions to move the industry forward into lower carbon future.
Gotcha. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
And, you know, we would love more bio and renewable diesel availability in the rest of Virginia. You know, mentioned DC, and you know, I don't know what the plan is or what can be done as far as making these renewable fuels more available across the entire country. You know, California obviously has, you know, pulls a lot, and with it being primarily produced in the Midwest, just geographically because of the that's where, you know, the oil seeds are grown. Any plans for the Southeast, for the Northeast, for the Mid-Atlantic like us? You know, how can we spread these fuels, the availability for these fuels, you know, elsewhere?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ways is speaking out and letting your local government know that that's a level of interest, because the industry is still, even though it's in place and being used, is still young enough that it needs to be fostered and through legislation. As we talked about, the majority, probably 95% of renewable diesel gallons are going to the West Coast, California specifically because they have the LCFS credits there, the low carbon fuel standard. We are seeing other states adopt similar legislation that definitely assists with that to get the cost more at parity to other fuels. So that's one opportunity, is local legislation, either at the federal level or state level, to encourage those types of fuels to come into the state. As you mentioned, Washington, we're bringing fuel into there now, and it's being utilized. We can do it on more siloed effects with certain groups, or large fleets are a target audience that really makes sense for them to go and transition to a lower carbon fuel and get it adopted, and helps them with their sustainability programs. But it's really about that legislation, getting it that kickstart. You know, I compare it to helping a toddler ride a tricycle for the first time. You know, you just don't stick them on a bike and let them go down the road. You actually get training wheels on there, and you're stabilizing them, and you're helping them get going. And once they get going, then you take the training wheels off, and then you're stabilizing them as you cut them loose, and ultimately you let it go and it'll take off. And then there's no telling where they're going to go after that. And it's kind of the same thing, is you need that little bit of guidance and support in the beginning to really get the industry going, in order to support it until you can see enough production to where price parity takes care of itself.
All right, thanks so much.
Yep.
Excellent answers. Glenn, here, come on up. I got a couple of questions for you.
All right.
And we've only got a few minutes left. I think we could have probably scheduled this one for at least an hour and a half and just made a dent. This is such a fascinating topic to explore today. But Glenn, are you seeing other farmers utilize these practices? And kind of as part of that, you know, what do you see as the greatest impediments to local biofuel production or increased adoption with other local farmers?
Probably about 10 years ago, there was a lot of interest in farm scale fuel production. I have a neighbor that he actually went to Richmond in the state of Virginia and got some laws changed to allow on-farm fuel production. Often they say ignorance is bliss, but it's often ignorance is resistance. So if you go ask permission to do something and no one knows anything about the industry, they envision this giant refinery from the Gulf Coast being built in your backyard. So there has been some resistance in the past of the old "not in my backyard" thing, even for something as small as a very small biodiesel production processor. Some of the resistance also comes from just cheap energy. I mean, even though we're paying $4 a gallon for diesel, we kind of get used to it, and people become complacent. And if you really don't have to think about it, you're not looking for an alternative. And it kind of goes in cycles. You see a lot of interest in alternative fuel, and then it just goes away, and then it resurfaces the next wave in inflation. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, but you just need to have a desire to do it and there needs to be a little less resistance in the regulatory fields.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. I think that's one of the quickest hours I've spent recently. Thank you again so much, John and Glenn. And who knows, it might just be a chemical engineer from rural Texas and a local farmer to help solve this climate issue.